All right, another video in our theme of common questions. And today's question is, how much should I develop the other characters in my story? Now, obviously, you are writing your memoir, and these aren't characters. They're just other people in your story, but we're going to call them characters. We really treat this like you would treat it in fiction, except you're not making stuff up, with the exception of changing some description for privacy purposes. But even then, the question still exists. How much do you need to really talk about the other people in your book? And when we say develop, what does that really mean? So I, I think it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that you are your main character in your book, and that we need to make sure that we know you, okay? You have to kind of develop your own character well. I've read rough drafts that I'm like, well, I don't even know what you look like. And one in particular, it took me probably 3/4 of the book to even know that this girl was like 5'4" and had long dark hair. I had no clue. I was like, well, what race are you? Are you tall? Are you slender? Are you, nothing. I just knew nothing about her physical description. Now, physical description is good. It's not the only thing we need to develop, but what you're trying to do is paint a picture for your readers of what these people look like, how they behave, how we should visualize these people. Does someone walk tall and straight and upright with perfect posture? What does that say about them as a person versus the person who shuffles and slumps and has horrible posture and, slouches all the time? What does that say about these two characters, right? So we want to not only describe what they look like in a non mugshot type of way, right? We're not like giving stats here, rattling off stats. He was 5'7" with brown hair, green eyes, broad shoulders. No, some of that is great, and you can weave that in naturally. What we really want are memorable details about the people in your book that help us not only remember who they are, especially if you have a decent sized cast of characters, but you also want to help us understand who they were to you and how who they were impacted your story and impacted you as a person. So you can kind of do this in a few different ways, and when I talk about other characters, please also consider how this applies to your own character as well. We want to know you. Without Just think of it like this. Without other people in our lives, just in general, like we would have a pretty boring kind of dull life. Like we wouldn't really have a lot of action. So people in our lives bring color. That brings flavor. That brings action. That brings something life to our lives. It's the same thing with your memoir. Other people are pivotal to your story. We can't have a story about you just roaming the earth with having no interaction about people. I don't think that's a good story. I don't know if that one exists. You could maybe try it. If you truly didn't run into anyone, I would be shocked. There are stories, of course, with people wandering the wilderness for days on end or weeks or however long. But at some point, there was a person in their book, right? Someone dropped them off there, or someone gave them money, or someone, ran across them or something, right? You aren't the only person in your book. That doesn't mean that no one else really matters because it's just your story. But that doesn't mean that we need to go off the deep end describing these people either, okay? So what's important is you kind of have to gauge these people. How important are they to your story? Are they like character number 2, like this person who is with you in every scene? Or are they character number 47 and they pop in and out for about 30 seconds in chapter 15, right? Depending on who they are and the importance level they have to your story will tell you how much you need to put into their development, into describing them and helping us get to know them. So if this is your memoir about surviving an abusive relationship, might we need to know who your abuser is? Probably. We may not need to know as much about them if your story just glimpses at the abusive, scenes, but really focuses more on the healing. Maybe we need to see who is around to help you heal. We need to understand who provided you support, who was there in your dark times, who you thought would help you but maybe didn't, that type of thing. So this other person that was kind of the catalyst for the events that sparked your story may not be as important, but we need to know some certain things, especially if they affect the future. So let's talk about this. How do we develop characters? What should we tell about them if not their rap sheet details, if not their stats? That you would rattle off in line at the jail. So think about how humans interact with each other already. We use our senses. We hear things, we see things, we smell things, we taste things, we feel things. So you want to describe these things. Maybe someone has a particular smell that just makes you think of them. They just have this smell combination that no matter what, when you have a similar smell entered into your life, you remember them, right? I can think of a few different examples that make me think of particular people. That might be a detail that your readers can hang on to and go, oh yeah, that's the guy who smells like fill in the blank, that cologne or whatever. That may not have a lot to do with the actual story, but it could just say something about his personality, about who this character is. Or maybe there's something that this person, it's just funky about them. Take, for example, a standard looking person, and I say standard, just nothing super memorable. They don't wear bright colored clothes. They kind of have an average haircut or an average build, and, nothing is extravagant about this person. Their average height, their average weight, they kind of look like just your average human. I don't know if there's such a thing as average human anymore, but you know what I mean, right? There's just nothing memorable about this person. But then you realize that he, drives a unicycle to work, or plays in a rock and roll band, or something that's so out of character for him that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. I'll give you an example from my real life. One of my really close friends is a pastor, but meeting him, you would never know. He shows up in shorts and basketball shoes and just t-shirts, and we just hang out and we talk about all sorts of random things. He doesn't carry around this air about him, and he doesn't walk around, banging people over the head with his Bible. He doesn't walk up in a suit. There is just nothing pastorish about him, to me anyway, not the pastors that I've encountered in my life. So it's so out of character for me that I would maybe in my memoir about, if he was a character in my book, I would refer to him as the pastor who doesn't look like a pastor at all, who has more pairs of tennis shoes than I have heels. He has a thing about tennis shoes or whatever. That's how I would describe this person, because it's something memorable. We're going to remember the pastor who had 300 pairs of tennis shoes. What? So something memorable. And again, use your senses if that's helpful. Sight is going to be something you lean on heavily. But what about touch? Every time you shook someone's hand, was it sticky? The guy with the sticky hand, or the woman with that fuzzy bag, and you always wanted to reach out and pet it. Or, maybe, I don't think we go around tasting people, but maybe you had a particular dessert or meal, or a taste brings back the memory of someone. We always, ate apple pie at grandma's or whatever. So that would be something you associate with that character. These details, what you're trying to do is build an image of this person that helps us remember them just because it's a memorable thing, but it gives us some insight as to who they are. Did I give you some insight as to who my friend is with the 300 pairs of shoes? Maybe not. And I think I'm making 300 up, but that's the detail that I can expand a little bit here just for my example. Did I tell you if I told you I had a friend who always had the sweatiest hands and I never wanted to shake his hand, maybe that would tell you he's a super nervous person. He was really nervous in front of me. So we need to know some of these things because of who they are in our book. Here's a perfect quote from Stephen King. He wrote in his book on writing. Description begins with visualization of what it is you want the reader to experience. So this guy with the sweaty hands, we probably all know what that feels like to get a handful of sweat. But what do we want the readers to experience there? Do we want them to experience our discomfort describing the sweaty hands? Do we want them to experience this vibe that this person gives off as this kind of nervous person? What is important about that? Maybe later, this is the guy who does something that to hurt us or to shock us or something, and we were like, okay, we should have seen this coming from sweaty hands. So think about what role they play in your story and what details about them make it are relevant to the role they play. Here's another thing that I want you to think of when we're going to take it back to a concept that I've talked about before, this show, don't tell. If you are talking about someone who displays a particular emotion quite frequently, let's just use anger, instead of just say like, oh, John was angry again or Jane was angry again, show us how this person expressed their anger. People express their emotions differently in different ways. So this helps us understand, was this person very explosive with their anger? Did they keep it inside? For example, I have a friend who her husband is a police officer, and when he got angry, he would get silent, like he would barely speak. You would hear him almost mumbling under his breath, keeping it in, keeping it contained. That's how she knew he was upset. So that's very different than someone who's explosive and whips dishes across the room, right? They both display a similar emotion, anger, but they tell us something different about these characters. So when you tell me this person was angry and this person was angry, there's no difference there. If you just say they're angry, I knew he was angry, I knew she was angry, that gives me nothing. But when you show us how they display that emotion, when you show us how people behave, you give us insights into their personality, and you help us understand how they can have an effect upon you. If you were nervous in front of someone, or if you felt comfortable in front of someone, it would be interesting if you felt comfortable in front of the person who whipped dishes across the room, right? We would be confused by that, but we wouldn't really know that about someone if you just said they were angry. So they're all this stuff is a little interconnected, but the point is you want to show us how these characters behaved, how they interacted with each other, how they interacted with you, so that we understand who they are in your story to you as the main character of your story, right? So one word of caution is I guess it's the same word, but what you need to make sure is that you don't give us too much and too little. It is really easy to give us too much. Oh yes, look at his brown hair flowing in the wind. Like maybe that's just not relevant at all. We don't need to know that. For example, I remember I did a developmental edit on on a book who they were describing this particular location, but the location was not important at all. It was sort of like, why did you just give me like the size of this room and the height of the ceiling and the color of the walls when you were in there for 14 seconds and you never came back and like nothing happened in that room? You know what I mean? We don't care about the beige walls if that has nothing to do with the mood or the events that took place, or maybe this was a room you revisited 15 times. If it's not important, you don't need to talk about it. So it's really easy to give us too much because you're trying to describe and paint this picture for the readers and you're feeling pressured to like tell them everything you saw and experienced. If it's not relevant, it doesn't belong. That can be a hard measuring stick to hold, but that is the rule. And then, of course, it can be very easy to not give us too much. So in that case, close your eyes and tell us what you see. I see this person whipping a plate across the room in anger. You don't see him angry. You see his behavior. You see the things happening. So try to really feel into that moment to describe what's going on. We only really need those relevant and memorable details that help us understand the context of the story. So again, like the average looking person, if nothing about him is relevant except for, you know, the fact that he drove the taxi cab to this particular location and let you out, we don't need to know he drove a unicycle to work, right? Like, we don't need to know much about the taxi cab driver. He's not very relevant to your story. So even though you know that memorable detail, maybe he told you, maybe it's like kind of amusing, it feels really irrelevant to your story because he's not a character. We don't need to know him. It feels like you're just rambling on and on about something that doesn't belong in your book. So even if there is something there, you don't necessarily need to tell us, oh, he's the one in the red pants. If, you know, that's just a random person on the street, who knows? So in the end, this is a bit of a fine art. This is a bit of a, this is kind of where the crafting your book comes in. This is something you will have to play with. It's something that's going to differ for each character. But I want to make sure that you know it does matter. It is important. And it will help your story the more we get to know your other characters, depending on their importance level. So start there. Lean into this a little bit. Ask yourself, what do my readers need to know about this person in order to understand their effect on my story? And then go with it. If you start out with that physical description, that's okay. You can kind of build a little character composite separately, a separate Word document, and just type up the things that you remember about this person, their physical description, how they behaved, and maybe from there you pick and choose what needs to go in your story. That can be where you get everything out, and then you can go back and highlight what's relevant, or you know, copy and paste into your story where you need to, but not everything belongs, and please include some things. Okay, that's the rule. So that's it for today's video. I will be back to answer some more questions, and I hope to see you then.